Hello, and welcome to Hadassah Magazine Presents, a joint program of Hadassah Magazine and Hadassah's Engagement Division. I'm Lisa Hostein, the Executive Editor of Hadassah Magazine. I'm so honored to be in conversation today with Maya Arad, who one Israeli newspaper has described as one of the, quote, finest living authors writing in Hebrew today. As she continues her prolific career, finally, non-Hebrew readers are able to access and enjoy her acclaimed work. We've focused today on her brand new book, Happy New Year's, which is just the second of her books to be translated into English. This title couldn't be more timely as we prepare to celebrate Rosh Hashanah next week. Maya has delivered both a delightful and insightful book, which among many engaging themes sheds light on what it means to be an Israeli living in America, a pertinent question as we all continue to grapple with the ongoing war in Gaza, today day 713, and the fate of the hostages, Israelis, Jews everywhere, and Gaza itself. If you're joining us for your first Hadassah Magazine Presents program, a special welcome. And I hope you take the time to learn more about Hadassah and the work it does to heal those in Israel and the world. If you're not already a member, please consider joining so you can enjoy the magazine, which is free with membership, as well as all the wonderful programming the magazine and the rest of Hadassah provides. And of course, your donations are always welcome and valued. Links for both membership and donations are in the chat box, as are links to buy Maya's book, which I highly recommend you do. And buy copies for your family and friends. The publisher is offering a special discount just through Sunday. We welcome audience questions throughout the conversation. Please be sure to write them in the Q&A. Maya is the author of 12 books of Hebrew fiction, as well as studies in literary criticism and linguistics. Born in Israel in 1971, she received a PhD in linguistics from University College London, and for the past 20 years has lived in California, where she is writer in residence at Stanford University's Toby Center for Jewish Studies. She won a National Jewish Book Award last year for The Hebrew Teacher, her first book translated into English. Her latest book is Happy New Year's, which, like The Hebrew Teacher, is beautifully translated by Jessica Cohen. Welcome, Maya. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you for having me here.
So Mazel Tov on your newest book. I really loved it. It's a seemingly simple story, but nuanced and witty. Through a series of letters, you weave a rich human story. You capture so much about what it means to be an immigrant, to live as an Israeli in America, what it means to be a woman struggling to find her place, making choices and decisions, not all of them so wise. So I want to start by asking you to give us a synopsis of Happy New Year's. What's the storyline, without giving away too much, of course, and where did the idea come from?
All right, so as you said, the story is quite simple. Happy New Year's is a novel made of 50 letters sent by an Israeli woman who goes to teach Hebrew in America at a Jewish day school, sometime, I think, in the late 1960s. I think the first letter is from 1967. And over 50 years, every year, just before Rosh Hashanah, she writes a letter to her friends from the teachers' college, telling them what happened over the past years, her news. So gradually, over 50 years, you see the life of a woman, an Israeli woman in America, how it evolves through. I don't think I'm divulging too much, but there are some punches along the way. There are some financial struggles, a divorce, a move across the country from Massachusetts to California. So this is the story of her life. But this is only half of the story because, as with any novel in letters, the real story is between the lines. What this woman, Leah, what she tells her friends and what we have to figure out ourselves, reading between the lines, because Leah works very hard to show her friends that she's living the American dream. Well, the reality is not always the case. So part of the book is actually not what is being told, but what is not being told, what we have to work hard to understand ourselves.
That's
Now,
part
as
of
for the
this.
idea, yeah, sorry. I love playing with forms, and the idea just came to me. I thought, wouldn't it be great to write a novel made out of letters, but not just an epistolary novel, but something, over 50 years every year. And after I had this idea, I was looking for the right character to put in this novel. And Leah was perfect, right? She's so bubbly and optimistic and naive. And she's just the perfect character for this kind of book.
So the question is, where did she come from? Is she any part you? Is she a compilation of all the people you know?
Wow. So as far as Leah's character is concerned, she's the opposite of me, which this is the fun of being an author, right? Because you can write about people who are so different from you. I'd love, I don't want to be as optimistic as Leah, as one reviewer, I think, in Israel called her naive to the point of stupidity. But it wouldn't hurt me to be a little bit more optimistic. I can learn something from Leah along the way. So I'm usually always thinking of the worst case scenario. So but in terms of Leah's biographical outlines, so both in my extended family and in my husband's extended family, there were women who moved to America to teach Hebrew. One person taught for a couple of years, met an Israeli student, she went back to Israel. Another person is still in this country. So the idea of, it was something that was around me when I was a child, the idea that when a woman reached the ripe old age of 25 and was still not married, you send her to teach Hebrew in America, maybe she will find some nice Jewish man. So I think this is what made me write about Leah,
That's so interesting because the opposite was often true. I'm not sure so much now, but if a woman in her mid 20s in America didn't find somebody, they'd send her to Israel because at least then we know for sure, at least a really good chance that he'd be Jewish. So
Right, yeah. It's
interesting.
a two-way exchange, yeah.
Right. So you mentioned that the benefit of being an author is you can write whatever you know and what you don't know. And some people say you should write what you know. And clearly, writing about an Israeli living in America is very much what you do know, right? But it's only your more recent books that you really touch on that subject wholly. So, why the shift for you? Why focus on this experience?
I think it partly has to do with, where ideas come from. And as you said, I've been living in California now for 23 years, which is as long as I lived in Israel. I had a few more years in between in different places, but yeah, now, yes, I spent more time in California than I did in Israel. So yes, this is what I know. This is I also live in a place where there are many Israelis. So I see a lot of people, I hear a lot of interesting life stories. It's a community that I live within and I want to write about. And I feel it's part of my job as a writer, to bring this community into Hebrew literature. Because when I was growing up, Hebrew literature was pretty much limited to the state of Israel. There were not many books about Israeli expats. And if there were any, usually, they were looked at judgmentally, why they chose to leave Israel. And, they were described as people who were either, after the money or, had no patriotic feelings. And I feel that I can write about these people because I'm one of them. So I can write about them, from within without not only without a judgmental look, because I think these days nobody judges anymore people who don't live in Israel, but my gaze is from within. I don't look at them as, kind of a very interesting anthropological creature. Let's look at those Israelis, but, I'm really one of them. So,
I want
and
to
I have many more ideas to write about, and it's a very interesting community.
Well, it's interesting because it seems to me that there's actually this trend of Israeli authors, particularly women, who are writing about Israelis in America. I'm thinking of Ayelet Gunder Goshen with The Wolf Hunt. We actually had an in-person event with her in January of February, I'm sorry, in February 2024, I believe. And Hunting in America by Tehila Hakimi, Ayelet Sabari's Song of the Brokenhearted, and to a lesser extent, Lihi Lapid's On Her Own. So again, for you, it definitely seems to make sense for all the reasons you just described, but there's clearly a fascination among your peers as well, some of whom may have had a briefer experience actually living here. So is it just a coincidence, or do you think there's something going on here?
I think there is something going on here. So yes, I think now the option of living outside Israel is a possibility. I can give you an example. When I was young, I went to graduate school in England, but the option of doing, college in America, it wasn't even on the table. And now I hear more and more about Israelis. They're more savvy. There's the internet. They know about, scholarships, and they do their college studies in America. So Israelis are more aware of the option of living abroad. And the authors that you mentioned, and I really recommend all of their books. Ayelet Gundergoshen did spend at least a year in the San Francisco area. Tehila Hakimi spent some time at the Iowa Writers Workshop. I'm sure this, informed her writing. And Ayelet Sabari, of course, she also writes in English, right? But she spent, I think, 20 years in Canada. So yes, this is I would put it this way. I think literature has finally caught up with reality, because in reality, there were Israelis in America all along, but now literature is starting to reflect it. And the readers in Israel are interested in it. Maybe this is the missing piece that I forgot to mention before. I never take it for granted that, readers in Israel are willing to read about Israeli expats. This also hasn't always been the case. So now.
Interesting. I actually want to mention that about 2 years ago, we had a big feature in the magazine of, I think we called it when female Israeli authors are having their moment. And we led the story with an anecdote from Ayelet Gundergoshen, who talked about, I think you probably know what I'm going to say. She talked about how when she was a teenager, her mother brought a book by you and placed it on the bookshelf next to all these famous Israeli men authors, and we all know who they are. And it really had an amazing impact on her. So I know that you're all a community, a lot of you are friends, and a lot of them have mentioned what a big influence you have been on them. So, I think that's really a tribute to you.
Oh, that's so sweet. I'm so touched. I remember this article. It was really heartwarming. Yeah,
Yeah.
But you're right. So there are more women authors today, and they take more center stage than they used to. So that's another great thing that's happening.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that's the other thing that I think it was the National Library in 2022 mentioned that it was the second year in a row that there were more female authors being published than male. And do you think that that is a trend that will continue?
I don't know. I can't tell. But one thing I can see is that, yes, when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, which was about a decade before Ayelet, when you thought of a writer, you thought of a man, mostly an Ashkenazi man. A.B. Yoshua was the exception. Mostly either from a big city or from a kibbutz like Amos Oz. And today writers come in all shapes and colors, right? There are women, there are immigrants from Russia and from Ethiopia. There are expats like me. There are, Israeli Arabs who write in Hebrew. So it's really, there's so much diversity, which is great.
So, of course, we've all been devastated by the October 7th massacre and the ongoing war, the reaction of the world, the anti-Semitism that has skyrocketed. But October 7th is especially close to home for you, Maya, not only as an Israeli, but you actually spend part of your childhood living on Kibbutz Nahal Oz, one of the Gaza envelope kibbutzim and nearby army base of the same name that were both devastated on October 7th, with 13 residents and nearly 60 soldiers at the base killed, with many residents and soldiers being taken hostage, including 7 of the female observer soldiers who had tried to issue warnings about Hamas activities prior to October 7th. So where were you when you first heard that horrific news?
I was in New York. I was visiting my daughter, and it took me a very long time to understand what's going on. I think everyone in Israel, by the time I was up, the thing has been going on for a while, and I was on the phone with my family texting, and I said, so how come everybody's still in the safe room? Why hasn't the army, arrived? So, and I think this was shared by many Israelis at this day. So just total confusion, not understanding, not even realizing what could happen. this was beyond the worst scenario of anybody could have, because, in conversations with friends and neighbors from Kibbutz Nahal Oz, people have been thinking about what happens if, a small squad of Hamas members might, infiltrate into the kibbutz and, uh, capture one building, but nothing on this scale. So this was beyond anything I could imagine. And the war that followed, both, and the devastation of Gaza is beyond anything I could imagine. It's a terrible tragedy.
Do you still have family on the kibbutz?
No, we have friends and neighbors.
Uh-huh.
I left with my parents when I was after sixth grade. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And have you been back to Israel since October 7th?
I have, yes.
Mm-hmm. Paint a picture for us of how your community in California came together even more so at this time. I mean, I have Israeli friends in America, and I know that while a lot of us shared the horror and the fear and the, shock, I think for Israelis living here, again, whether you had those really direct ties or just being Israeli, it was a different level altogether. Can you remember like what the community did to come together to try to bring comfort?
Well, I don't think I have any, special perspective on this. We Israelis in the Bay Area, just came together like many Israelis all across, the country. One thing I can mention in particular is that we had about 5 or 6 people who grew up in Kibbutz Nahal Oz in the Bay Area. So in November of 2023, we put together, a commemoration evening at the JCC, but it was not a sad thing. It was celebrating the kibbutz days as we knew them. So we had a program in English for the Americans and then followed by a Hebrew one. It was also a fundraiser for the kibbutz because, the kibbutz was devastated. They needed to rebuild everything. So, there were 2 musicians and a singer, and I wrote something that I read, and people met for a sing-along because, kibbutzim were known for their sing-alongs, and it was a beautiful evening.
Lovely. So your last book, The Hebrew Teacher, which I also highly recommend, it's a collection of 3 novellas, and it was almost prescient in a way, being set in 2014, right after Israel's war in Gaza then, which was dubbed Operation Protective Edge, in which you describe some of the conflicts on campus going on that followed that war, particularly in your story with a non-Zionist Israeli professor of Hebrew literature, a very complex character. So, given what we know has been transpiring on American campuses since October 7th, and of course prior to that, what has been your experience both pre and especially post October 7th at Stanford?
I'm not the person to ask because I work at the Center for Jewish Studies, so I feel very much shielded. And my husband is in classics, and classicists tend to be, more, even keeled and not prone to extreme theories. So I think every person has a different experience. The fact that, I was not touched by any of the horrible things that other people go through doesn't mean that it does not exist. And I heard stories from people in other disciplines like comparative literature and education and social work that, bad things, bad sayings. I think I recently read a book translated from Polish. I think it's coming out in English just these days. My Name is Starmer, about a Jewish family in Poland between the 2 world wars. And it documents how the Polish people are becoming more and more anti-Semitic. And one of the daughters in the family thinks, people nowadays say out loud things that they didn't even dare to think a few years ago. So sometimes that's how I feel.
That's how a lot of us feel, given what's going on. Those of
Yeah,
us who have been here our whole lives are, again, shocked, but not necessarily surprised at the level that it has gone to.
right.
Do you
And I
hear?
think many Israelis are experiencing for the first time anti-Semitism. So this is a new thing. Yeah.
and it seems that even Israelis in Israel are also maybe not as focused as the ones here and clearly dealing with a lot of other things. But I've heard the just unbelievable surprise that even it could exist. And it really is just a case. You know, there was a report in 2024, I believe, by a Stanford committee convened to investigate anti-Semitism
Mm.
and anti-Israel bias on campus. And it concluded, not surprisingly, like a lot of schools, that anti-Semitism exists today on the Stanford campus in ways that are widespread and pernicious. And Stanford is also, of course, one of the schools that the Department of Education is looking at for possible violation of Title VI issues relating to anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination. So I understand that you feel like a little shielded, but I wonder what the overall atmosphere is. Do some of the students that you interact with talk to you about these issues? Are they directly impacted?
I really feel uncomfortable talking in the name of someone else. I can only speak about my own experience. Probably, the way I felt it most strongly is as a mother of a student, but my daughter doesn't go to Stanford. She goes to school in New York. So,
And what has her experience been?
oh, I'm not sure if she wants me to talk about her, but she has been, bullied. She's an art student, she's an artist, and just because she decided to put on a show in memory of the October 7 victims, and the show is actually not about October 7, it's about, pictures from my childhood in Nahal Oz. Her art was based on photos that my father took of us growing up. So it was, again, celebrating the life, not about the death. So she was bullied by her classmates that, she's glorifying colonialism and so supporting genocide. I hate even, mentioning it. We've all had enough of that. We've all heard those stories. This is not what I'm here for today, but I'm just touching
It's not
briefly.
new. It's not new. Well, that's a good segue because I do want to go back to the book and some of the more details. And so one of the I mean, all of the letters were so fascinating and, progressed in a certain way, which was interesting. But in one of her last letters to her friends, Leah, by then a much older and wiser woman, says, I did not fight and I did not change the world. Still, I did do something. I fought for my own livelihood. I learned a vocation on my own. I raised my children alone. I gave them an opportunity for a better future. So, despite her many foibles, and I'm sure I'm not alone, I found myself both shaking my head at her, I don't know if I'd call it stupidity as you referenced, but probably close to that in many instances, but also being captivated by her and really rooting for her. So, what does her journey say about issues which you interestingly highlight in the preface in a very clever, kind of tongue in cheek way by describing this collection as a quote, document of enormous historical and ideological value centering pivotal questions of gender, cultural, and sexual politics. So, how does Leah's story highlight these issues captivated at a certain time, which is what you focus on?
So let me first of all explain to those who haven't read the book. So the foreword is by supposedly an academic and a publisher who received Leah's letters from her son, along with a very generous donation for her newly founded feminist press. And the reason is that Leah's dream was to have a book published. She wanted to have her letters collected in a book, and this is what her son did for her. So this publisher is quite torn because on the one hand, I guess she wants Leah's son's money, but she doesn't quite know what to do with it. So she says, it has no literary value, but it has a lot of historical and ideological value. And I don't think she means that, but I think, yes, absolutely. Over 50 years that those letters are written, there have been enormous changes in the status of women, first and foremost, the status of the rights of LGBT people, the way Israel treats Israeli expats, because, at the beginning, Leah apologizes. I didn't leave Israel. I just went on a mission to teach Hebrew. And what can I do? I met my husband and he's an American. Later on, she doesn't even bother to justify herself. It's a normal thing. And also technology, right? Because she starts with being amazed at the Xerox machine that they have in America. And at the end, she writes, she sends emails. So, but I think the status of women is the most important thing there. Leah describes at the beginning offhandedly how she was, sexually harassed by her commanders in the army. At the time, you wouldn't even call it harassed, right? You would say he couldn't keep his hands to himself or something like that. And of course, this changed a lot. And towards the end, she says, now I know that I was harassed, that even worse than harassed. She understands. And I think one of the interesting things is that at the beginning of the book, Leah internalizes the way society treats women. So she herself talks about other women in a disparaging way sometimes. And towards the end, she learns to be more, tolerant, to accept other women as her sisters, not as her enemies. And that's another way of her growing.
Mm. Certainly a reflection of the changing times, right?
Changing times and changing personality, because I think this is because we have 50 years and minuscule changes every year, so you can really see how she changes, from a young woman to an older woman, and also being shaped by the experiences she had.
So I want to dig a little deeper into an issue that you've mentioned several times about the status of Israelis who've left Israel, because it really does seem to be true that that old stigma, the Yordim, right, the going down as opposed to the Olim who made Aliyah to Israel, has shifted dramatically. And I guess the question is, you mentioned that people are aware of opportunities that are different, but what else is going on? Why do you think that shift has happened?
Well, no, there are so many different factors at play that, and I guess for each person who left Israel, it's a different mix of factors. I think, yes, the social stigma is a lot weaker, so that helps many people to, I don't know if it helps them, stay in America, because people have stayed in America for years before that, but not to feel so guilty. Years ago, I was in an Israeli book club in Chicago, a very well-known book club where, the members were in their 80s and 90s. And at some point, they all wanted to talk about their experiences as Israelis abroad. And one woman told me that when she moved to New York in 1953, she was so ashamed that if she saw someone she knew from Israel on the street, she would cross to the other side, not to show her face. So I find this really fascinating. And still, even today, an Israeli in Silicon Valley told me a couple of years ago, he read a Hebrew teacher. He said, your characters don't feel guilty at all for having left Israel. And I told him, you're right, they don't. So I think, for all of us, there are different levels. Even those of us who ideologically are okay with leaving Israel, we have loved ones and friends who are there, and times are very difficult in Israel right now. So of course, we're thinking of them, we're thinking of Israel. It's not a tie that you can just sever. But yes, I think the ideology, the fact that you can, uh, high tech is a big thing in Israel, and this is a very big way for Israelis to just to have an opportunity to either move for a few years or to go and live elsewhere. I think also the fact that America has become more multicultural and accepting to immigrants makes Israelis and other immigrants feel more comfortable. So the incentive of going back may not be as strong.
Mm.
But I think every person is a different story. I can't really speak for everyone.
I'm sure that's true, and I'm sure even every Israeli who comes right from a different perspective. I
Yeah.
actually have a good friend whose Israeli son-in-law is here for a couple of years studying and working, and while for a variety of reasons it would have been much easier for him to apply for a green card, he told her he didn't want to do that because he was afraid that then that would make it too easy for him to stay, which I thought was really interesting.
It is, yes.
Do you personally have any conflicting feelings anymore, or you feel I mean, I guess these are two separate questions. One is, do you have any conflicting feelings, harboring any of that idea of, where do I belong? And the other is, do you feel completely American?
So I'll start with the second question because it's easier. I don't feel completely American, and I don't think I felt completely Israeli while I lived in Israel. So I think this feeling of not always belonging is always with me. And maybe I'm going back to one of your earlier questions. Maybe this is something I share with Leah, because Leah also, she didn't feel like she belonged in Israel. She was an immigrant from Romania among her Israeli-born friends. Then in America, of course, she was an Israeli in America, and even within the Israeli community, she felt, set apart, maybe because she was divorced or because just, she didn't really feel like she belonged. So this is something, I never feel like I belong completely. On the other hand, I am an American citizen, so I'm a dual citizen. And I have absolutely no conflicts about living in this country. In fact, we made our decision, my husband and I, 29 years ago, the day Netanyahu was first elected. We realized that this man is terrible. He turned out to be beyond terrible, but I'm sorry if I go into this. I'm sorry if people don't agree with me, but I can't hold myself. It has to be said. And, I told you that I'm a pessimist, but even a pessimist like me couldn't imagine where it would bring Israel. So it's very, very sad.
So there's no regret certainly at this point that
No,
you're living in America. So that
no.
actually brings me to another question about the fact that you continue to write in Hebrew. And in fact, the Hebrew teacher, right, starts to think about writing a memoir and she struggles whether she should write in Hebrew or English. In fact, the novella starts with it's not a very good time for Hebrew these days, really referring to the fact that very few students want to study it at university. But have you wrestled with the idea of writing in English?
No, never. Before I became a writer, I was a linguist. And, I don't remember much from my linguistic studies, but one thing I do remember is that, we know our mother tongue in a way that we cannot know any other language, that we come to later in life. So even though I may speak more or less fluently with many mistakes, I will never be able to write in English. So that's one thing. So Ilana, in the story, the Hebrew teacher feels that she has no language because her English is not good enough and her Hebrew is already rusty. So I'm learning from Ilana's experience. I know that my English will never be good enough, but I'm fighting to keep my Hebrew not rusty. I read, I write, I speak it at home. So that's, but even beyond the language itself, even if my English was perfect for some reason, I grew up with Hebrew literature. This is the literature that I grew up reading. This is where all my, sensibilities lie. I'm a Hebrew writer, even if I were writing in English.
And I imagine that having such a wonderful translator as Jessica Cohen probably makes you think there's no way I could do it as good as well as she does, right?
Of course, yes, Jessica is an amazing translator, and I think, I've never seen anything like her translation. I can tell you that I read the Hebrew teacher in Hebrew out loud to my daughter, and then she read the English herself, and she said the English is better. Because it's so seamless and flowing, and a lot of it is a retranslation because many of the conversations in the story actually took place in English because it's the setting of the story is an American university, and then they had to be. I wrote them in Hebrew, and when Jessica translates something, it's very often different from what I would imagine it to be, because my imagination can only go as far as, okay, so if I take my Hebrew words and try to translate them into English, it will probably sound like, and Jessica really rewrites the whole thing in English as if it was a
Mm,
new text.
mm,
So
interesting.
I'm really lucky to be able to work with her.
Mm. We have a couple questions from the audience, and I want to go to those. One member asks whether there's a common theme or what you see as a common theme in Happy New Year's and the Hebrew teacher?
Well, there is definitely a common theme. Actually, in Hebrew, the Hebrew teacher came out in 2018, and Happy New Year's came out in 2023, and there was another book in between. The English title is all about Abigail. And this was about a Hebrew writer who lives in Israel. And it was all about, the little intrigues of Hebrew literature. So actually, when Happy New Year's came out, I thought, okay, now people will think that they can only write about, Israeli women in America who teach Hebrew. So so that's one common theme. And of course, yes, I guess women and immigration is a very obvious common theme between these two books.
Right, Israelis living in America. So,
Yeah.
what kind of reception have your two books translated into English gotten? We've at the magazine have devoted a lot of articles and programs to what's happening in the publishing world vis-a-vis Jewish authors, Israeli authors. Sometimes it's this, and we know it's a mixed bag. It's not completely
Mhm.
bleak as a lot of people think. We continue to get press releases and pitches from Jewish themed books, Jewish authors, Israeli authors, but we also know there has been backlash and that we don't know what hasn't been published as a result. So I'm wondering whether you think, and this may be a little bit of a hard question for you to answer, but do you think the Hebrew teacher and Happy New Year's have gotten the kind of mainstream reviews and a reception that you had hoped for?
Again, I didn't have any previous experience with, if I had, many books in English and all of a sudden I would see that, oh, now I'm not getting any exposure, then I would be able to answer that. But since this was my first experience with publishing in English, I'm grateful for anything. And, we should remember, that's what I'm telling friends when they ask me about the situation. I say, before anti-Semitism and bias and everything, publishing business is in trouble. So this is the first thing we have to remember. So that there are less and less, reviews and less outlets. So so far, I'm very happy with the reception.
That's good. And I know that you're out on the road to a certain extent now, giving talks at bookstores, et cetera. Have you gotten any backlash? Have you had any negative experiences?
No, I haven't actually. For the Hebrew teacher, we had an event, I think in April of 2024, and in a bookstore, and I was prepared, bracing myself for, because this was a time when Israeli filmmakers and artists had a lot of heckling and backlash, but I found out that nobody really cares about literatures.
So that's really the
Whether
problem, not your particular book, right? Which of course is something that we all worry about. And it's not completely true because again, books are being published. And even though the industry has been consolidated and it is difficult, but as somebody said on a panel that I did recently on this subject, you don't know if a book wasn't published, you don't know because it had an Israeli theme or a Jewish author or it just wasn't good. And so a lot of it is really hard to calculate the actual impact.
right,
Interestingly, Deborah Harris, who I'm sure you know, is one of the big agents in Israel who works to get Israeli authors translated around the world. And she has encountered a lot of difficulty. We had a Q&A with her in a recent issue of the magazine, and she made the point about the well-known authors, you probably being in that category, are okay, right? Nobody, they know that you already have a market. But as she worries about the younger up and coming authors who may get the same chance, whether they will or not.
right, right.
Yeah.
But I think the same goes for, it's very interesting that you said that, because when I'm often being asked about, the Sapir Prize in Israel, the most prestigious literary prize, so writers who don't live in Israel are no longer eligible to apply for this prize. And I'm the one who gets asked about it because I don't live in Israel. And I always say, I have a publisher, I have readers in Israel, I'm not worried about it. But what about, young unknown authors who live abroad and don't even get a chance to get published? And it's much harder on them. Yeah, it's always harder for.
Right, right. So I want to switch to a different theme. This title of your book is wonderful. Happy New Year's. As I said, the timing is great for us. We're so happy that we had you here right before. But that whole premise, encapsulating the whole story within the missives that Leah sends to her friends every year, it got us thinking about the lost art of sending Rosh Hashanah cards. And as you saw from our opening slides and some of the social media promotion, our team had a lot of fun digging up these old Rosh Hashanah cards, vintage, that are just, so classic. And I have to say that until about 5 years ago, I used to send Rosh Hashanah cards to all my friends and family. It was just the one time that I knew each year that I could reach out to them. I certainly was not as elaborate in my writing. It was more like Love, Lisa. But still, I wonder the fact that people have stopped that for the most part, right? Some people will, post one social media, Shana Tova, to everybody. Do you have any personal recollections or carry any nostalgia about sending Rosh Hashanah cards or greetings?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So in my kibbutz in Nahal Oz, every year they would select a few pictures from the past year, usually representing the agriculture of the kibbutz. The fields of sunflowers or wheat or the cotton. We were very big on cotton. Sometimes it would be the cows of the kibbutz or the irrigation. The kibbutz got a prize for developing new systems of irrigation. So we would sit and write Rosh Hashanah cards for all our friends and acquaintances, and being very proud of our kibbutz. There's also, I don't know if you've been in during the winter months in the western Negev near Gaza, but it's beautiful, beautiful bloom of anemones and other flowers. So this was also one of the Rosh Hashanah cards. Yes, actually, they're as nostalgic to me as those early 20th century cards that you put in the slideshow.
And do you still send any sort of Rosh Hashanah greetings, or do you post on social media, which I know you're not really that active on anyway? How do you convey your Shana Tova to your friends and family?
To be honest, WhatsApp messages. I know.
I'm doing that too. It's very
Yeah,
easy, right? And sometimes
yeah,
calls if it's somebody really
yeah.
special, right? Right, right. Well, I think that's a really good note to end on. I want you to know how much we appreciate you being with us today. And before we say goodbye, I have a few announcements. So first, I want to remind our audience that Hadassah Magazine Presents recently launched as a podcast. You will find our conversations, including today's with Maya, as well as recent ones with Mayim Bialik, Dara Horn, and Ayelet Sabari, wherever you get your podcasts and on the podcast page of hadassah.org. You'll still want to register for these live events to be part of the real-time action and to be able to ask questions of our guests. But in case you miss it, you'll be able to get the podcast and listen while taking a walk, commuting, or cooking dinner. And you can share it with your family and friends. So we really, really ask that you listen, share it, and rate it to help boost interest. You can sign up for alerts as well, so you'll know when new episodes drop on that podcast page of the Hadassah website. As for our upcoming Hadassah Magazine Presents programs, on Wednesday, October 29th at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, note the daytime hour, I'll be hosting renowned Israeli writers Yossi Klein Halevi and Lee Aron for a discussion about what it means to be a Jew today in a post-October 7th world, how Israeli survivors are coping, and what almost 2 years of war and rising global anti-Semitism mean for the future of the Jewish people. Klein Halevi is a journalist, author, and senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and Lee Aron, a journalist with Haaretz, is the author of 10-7, 100 Human Stories, which was named the 2024 National Jewish Book Award Book of the Year. Both these writers have powerful pieces in the September-October issue of Hadassah Magazine that I encourage you to read in your print issue or online. In November, I will be recording a Hadassah Magazine Presents podcast from the Miami Book Fair with author Pam Nadell, a leading historian of American Jewish history who has an important new book coming out called Anti-Semitism in American Tradition, about the history of anti-Semitism in the United States. And on December 8th at 8 p.m., we'll be back with a live virtual event like this one with Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, the spiritual leader of Central Synagogue in Manhattan, who is considered one of the most inspiring and influential rabbis in America today, and who will soon be releasing her own memoir, Heart of a Stranger. Lastly, none of you will want to miss what is certain to be a moving and important virtual event that Hadassah is hosting on October 9th. One Heart, One People, a commemoration of October 7th, will honor the memories of those murdered and taken hostage and pay tribute to those who leapt into action, including those at Hadassah's hospitals in Jerusalem, at Hadassah-supported youth villages, and among Hadassah activists around the United States. Links to register for this and for the October 29th event are in the chat box, and we will be in the follow-up, and it will be on the follow-up email tomorrow as well. I want to thank Leah Finkelstein, our senior and book editor, who helped plan and implement this program, along with the magazine's digital editor, Ariel Kaplan, who both promoted and produced it. And a shout out to our partners in the engagement and marketing and communication divisions, who always play an important role in making these events happen. A reminder that in the chat box and in a follow-up email you will get tomorrow are links to purchase Maya's books with a publisher discount of 20%. Somebody asked that in the Q&A. Only available through September 21st. Of course, you can purchase it elsewhere after that, but if you want to get your discount, go ahead and do it after this program ends. As well as there will be links to donate to Hadassah and become a member of the organization. So again, Maya, a huge thank you for candidly sharing with us your literary brilliance as well as your personal stories. I wish you and your family a Shana Tova. May it be a happy and sweet year in which we all find peace and our loved ones come home.
Thank you, and Shana Tova.
And thank you for all of you for joining us today. I hope to see you back at our next program. And don't forget to look for the Hadassah Magazine Presents podcast. Shana Tova to all.